Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Station. His eyes stayed fixed on the large screen in front of him. The screen showed 37 alien ships floating in the darkness of space beyond Mars. Each ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built. They looked like hunters waiting to attack their prey. The alien message had arrived 3 hours ago. The ship's computers had translated it into English. The aliens called themselves the Vakri Empire. They said this part of space belonged to them and had belonged to them for many years. Humans were not supposed to be here. The Vakri gave Earth a simple choice: leave the solar system within 72 hours or the aliens would force them to leave. Lieutenant Amy Parker walked over from the communications desk. Her face looked pale and worried, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke. She told Jake that messages were coming in from all the human colonies. Mars Station had responded. The mining operations near Jupiter had responded. All the settlements in the asteroid belt had responded. Everyone was asking the same question. Were they really going to fight the aliens? Jake turned away from the screen to look at Amy. Then he looked around at the other people on the bridge. These men and women had trained to protect Earth from space rocks and dangerous asteroids. They had not trained for war against aliens from another world. But when Jake looked into their eyes, he saw something important. He saw that they were not afraid. They were angry. The aliens had not expected humans to feel this way. Jake spoke quietly, but everyone could hear him clearly. He told Amy to connect him to all the stations in the solar system. Then he said something that made everyone stand up straighter. He told them to wake up the fleet. The Vakri had made a big mistake. They had watched human ships for some time before sending their message. They had seen the mining ships that dug minerals from asteroids. They had seen the research stations where scientists studied space. They had seen the passenger ships that carried people between Earth and Mars. The aliens thought humans were still new to space travel. They thought humans would be easy to scare. What the Vakri did not know was that humans had hidden their warships in the dark, empty spaces between the planets. Humans had not built these warships because they wanted to attack other planets. They built them because history had taught them an important lesson. Peace lasted longest when people were ready to defend themselves. Every major country on Earth had worked together to build the fleet. Their best engineers and scientists had worked in secret for many years. Each ship had a name that meant something special. Some were called Valiant and Freedom's Call. Others were named Iron Dragon and Southern Cross. The names honored where the ships came from and what they were built to do. Jake's message traveled through space to all the human colonies. Something began to happen in the darkness between the worlds. Power systems that had been turned off for years started to warm up. Weapon systems turned on and checked themselves to make sure they still worked. Men and women who had trained for this day rushed to their battle stations. They had hoped this day would never come, but they were ready. The hidden warships began to move. They had been waiting in the cold darkness like sleeping giants. Now they were waking up. Lights came on inside the ships. Engines that had been cold and silent started to hum with power. Computer systems activated and showed the positions of the alien fleet. Weapons that had never been fired in real combat were now ready to protect Earth and all the human colonies. Captain Kyle Bennett sat in the command chair of the warship called Valiant. The ship was one of the largest humans had ever built. It had been sleeping in the darkness for 3 years, waiting and hoping it would never be needed. Now Kyle felt the ship come alive around him. The floor vibrated slightly as the massive engines powered up. The air system started working, bringing fresh air to every part of the ship. The lights on the control panels blinked on one by one. All around Kyle, his crew worked quickly and smoothly. They had practiced this moment hundreds of times in training. Their hands moved across the glowing controls without hesitation. Lieutenant Ben Martinez sat at the weapons station. He reported that all systems were working perfectly. The main guns were charging up with power. The defense systems were online and ready. The ship was ready for battle. Through the window of the bridge, Kyle could see other ships appearing from their hiding places. Huge battleships with thick armor moved into position. Fast destroyer ships raced forward to form a defensive line. Carrier ships opened their hangar doors and small fighter craft flew out like angry bees leaving a hive. The human fleet was coming together, and it was much bigger than the Vakri had imagined. On the Vakri flagship, Commander Zektar stared at his sensor screens with confusion and growing worry. The primitive human ships his scouts had seen before were now being joined by many other ships. These new ships showed power readings that were as strong as Valkyrie technology. Some readings were even stronger. This did not make sense. The Valkyrie intelligence reports had said humans were barely capable of space travel. Where had all these warships come from? Zektar's tactical officer studied the incoming data. Her face showed concern. She told the commander that the human ships were moving into a military formation. This was not random movement. This showed training and planning. These were not the actions of primitives who had just learned to fly between planets. She reported that her sensors were detecting weapons unlike anything in the Valkyrie database. The humans had kinetic weapons that fired solid projectiles at enormous speeds. They had directed energy beams. They also appeared to have missiles with nuclear fusion warheads. Back on the Earth Defense Station, Jake watched as 63 warships formed up into battle formation. This was humanity's secret defense force hidden until this moment. The fleet was not as large as the Valkyrie fleet. The aliens still had more ships. But humans had something the aliens did not understand. Humans had something that came from the world where they were born. Earth was what the galaxy called a death world. The gravity was heavier than on most planets where intelligent life had evolved. The weather could be deadly with huge storms and extreme temperatures. Dangerous predators had hunted human ancestors for millions of years. Diseases had killed millions of humans throughout history. Most species in the galaxy would die quickly on Earth. But humans had not just survived on this harsh world. They had learned to master it. They had become the most dangerous predators on their own planet. Then they had left their world and carried that fighting spirit with them to the stars. A message came from the Valkyrie flagship. The alien commander's face appeared on the main screen. He looked calm and confident. He spoke in a language that the computers translated into English. He said the humans had revealed hidden weapons. This changed nothing, he claimed. The humans should stand down. They should evacuate their worlds. If they did not, the Valkyrie Empire would show them real power. Jake stepped forward so the cameras would focus on him. His response went out not just to the Valkyrie ships but to every human station, every colony, and every ship in the solar system. He spoke clearly and firmly. He identified himself as Commander Jake Harrison of Earth. He said the aliens had come to the human home and demanded that humans leave. The Valkyrie had threatened human families and the future that humans had built. Humanity had only one answer to give them. The answer was no. Humans would not leave their homes. They would not surrender. If the Valkyrie wanted to take human worlds, they would have to fight for every single one. Jake paused to let his words sink in. Then he spoke again with even more intensity. The Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake. They had picked the wrong species to threaten. They had picked the wrong world to try to invade. Humans were the children of Earth, a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. Humans had learned to survive against impossible odds, and humans did not kneel to anyone. The transmission ended. Space seemed to hold its breath for a long moment. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Then the sensors showed the Valkyrie fleet beginning to move forward. Their weapons started to charge with power. They were preparing to attack. The human fleet did not retreat. The warships held their positions. Every weapon turned toward the approaching alien vessels. After millions of years of evolution on a death world, after centuries of human history filled with wars and struggles, after decades of preparing for this moment, humanity was ready. The Deathworlders were awake, and they were ready to fight. The first shots came from the Valkyrie fleet. Bright beams of energy shot across the darkness of space. The beams traveled at the speed of light, crossing the distance between the two fleets in less than a second. Some of the human ships fired their defensive lasers at the incoming beams. The lasers destroyed some of the energy weapons before they could hit, but many beams got through the defenses. The destroyer ship called Hampton took a direct hit on its left side. The alien energy beam was incredibly hot. Where it touched the ship's armor, the metal turned into vapor instantly. A bright flash lit up the darkness. Everyone watching thought the Hampton would explode and break apart. But something unexpected happened. The Hampton did not explode. The outer layer of armor had been destroyed, but there were more layers underneath. The ship had been built with many backup systems. When one system failed, another one automatically took over. The ship shook from the impact. Alarms went off inside, but within just a few seconds, the Hampton was already fighting back. Its weapons turned toward the Valkyrie ship that had fired at it. Commander Zektar watched his sensor screens with growing disbelief. His opening attack should have destroyed several human ships completely. The Valkyrie weapons were powerful. They had destroyed enemy fleets in past battles with ease. But these human ships were different. They were built much stronger than the Valkyrie had expected. Even when hit directly, the human ships kept fighting. Then the human counterattack began. Zektar was about to learn what weapons built by Deathworlders really looked like. The human railguns fired first. These were not energy weapons like the Valkyrie used. Railguns fired solid metal slugs. The slugs were heavy pieces of dense metal, and they were fired using powerful magnets. The magnets accelerated the slugs to incredible speeds. Each slug was moving at a large fraction of the speed of light when it left the gun. They crossed the space between the fleets in seconds. The Valkyrie ships had energy shields that could deflect laser beams and energy weapons. But these shields could not stop solid objects. The railgun slugs simply punched straight through the shields as if they were not there. The first slug hit a Valkyrie cruiser right in the middle. The impact released an enormous amount of energy. The cruiser broke into pieces like it was made of thin glass. Debris scattered in all directions. Lieutenant Nicole Ross worked at the weapons station on the Valiant. Around her, the bridge was filled with noise and activity. Alarms were sounding. Officers were calling out reports. But Nicole's voice stayed calm and clear. She gave orders to target the alien flagship with the main guns. She told the missile batteries to spread their fire across the alien destroyer screen. She ordered the point defense systems to get ready for incoming fighter craft. The Valiant's main gun turrets began to move. Each turret was enormous. The gun barrels were longer than a city block. Motors and hydraulics moved these massive weapons with surprising precision. They turned and tilted until they pointed exactly at the alien flagship. When they fired, the recoil was so powerful that it pushed the entire Valiant backward. This happened even though the Valiant weighed millions of tons. 4 metal slugs streaked toward the Valkyrie flagship. Each one carried kinetic energy equal to a small nuclear bomb. The flagship's energy shields tried to stop them. The shields glowed bright as they absorbed energy, but the shields could not handle this much force. They flickered and failed. The slugs hit the flagship's hull. Armor plates buckled and tore. Internal explosions erupted along the ship's length. The flagship survived but was badly damaged. Next came the missiles. The human ships fired hundreds of them. Each missile was guided by its own computer. Each one carried a fusion warhead. When these warheads exploded, they created tiny suns that burned at millions of degrees. The Valkyrie point defense systems tried to shoot down the incoming missiles. Their defensive lasers destroyed most of them before they could reach their targets. But some missiles got through. When they exploded, they carved huge holes in the Valkyrie formation. Ships that were too close to the explosions were torn apart or badly damaged. Captain Ryan Clark flew his fighter through the growing field of debris. His small craft was called Swift Arrow. He led a squadron of 12 fighters. They called themselves the Ghost Riders. The fighters weaved and dodged between pieces of destroyed ships. Valkyrie energy beams shot past them, but the human pilots were too fast and too skilled. They had trained for thousands of hours in simulators. They had practiced flying in Earth's strong gravity. This made their reflexes faster than the Valkyrie pilots. Ryan spoke quickly over the radio to his squadron. He ordered all fighters to focus their attack on the Valkyrie carrier ship. If they could destroy the carrier before it launched its fighters, that would give the humans a big advantage. The Ghost Riders dove toward their target. Their weapons were smaller than those on the big warships, but they were still deadly. They fired missiles and energy cannons at the carrier's hangar doors. The human fighters moved with incredible agility. They could turn sharper and accelerate faster than the Valkyrie expected. The human pilots had grown up on a high-gravity world. Their bodies and their reflexes had adapted to that environment. The fighter craft were also built stronger than alien ships. They were designed to survive entering a planet's atmosphere at extreme speeds. This meant they could take hits that would destroy most alien fighters. Deep underground on Earth, in a command center built beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Emma Bradford watched the battle on large display screens. The screen showed every ship in both fleets. They showed which ships were damaged and which were destroyed. They showed the paths of missiles and the locations of fighter squadrons. Around Emma, dozens of people worked at computer stations. They were analysts and communications officers. They coordinated information and sent orders to the fleet. Emma's voice cut through the controlled chaos in the command center. She demanded a status report. She needed to know how the battle was going. Major Alex Turner looked up from his station. His face was serious as he read the data. The information was not all good, but it was not hopeless either. Alex reported the losses. 3 human destroyers had been completely destroyed. 2 frigates had also been lost. 8 more ships had been hit hard and were reporting heavy damage. But those 8 damaged ships were still able to fight. On the enemy side, 12 Valkyrie ships had been confirmed destroyed. 18 more were showing damage. Most importantly, the Valkyrie formation was starting to break apart. The aliens were losing their organized structure. Emma nodded as she absorbed this information. The Valkyrie had more ships than the humans did. That was still true. But the humans had something the Valkyrie did not have. Every human in the fleet knew what they were fighting for. Behind them were their home planets. Behind them were their families and friends. Behind them was everything they had built and everything they hoped to build in the future. They were not fighting for conquest or for resources. They were fighting for survival. This made the humans more dangerous than the Valkyrie had imagined possible. A cornered animal will fight with desperate strength. Humans were not just cornered. They were defending their children and their future. They would accept no outcome except victory. On the Valkyrie flagship, Commander Zektar tried to understand what was happening. His fleet was supposed to be superior in every way. The Valkyrie Empire had conquered dozens of worlds. They had defeated many enemies. But in less than an hour of fighting, they had already lost a third of their ships. The humans had lost ships too, but not as many. And the human ships that were damaged kept fighting anyway. Zektar realized he had made a critical error. He had assumed that because humans were new to space travel, they would be weak. He had not considered what kind of species could survive on a death world and then reach the stars. Humans had evolved in a harsh environment. They had developed technology while dealing with extreme challenges. They had learned to work together because cooperation was the only way to survive. The battle continued to rage. Explosions lit up the darkness. Energy beams flashed between the 2 fleets. Missiles traced bright paths through space. Fighter craft dueled with each other. Ships on both sides were being destroyed, but neither side was willing to retreat. The Valkyrie had their pride and their orders. The humans had their homes and their determination. More human ships arrived from the outer colonies. They had been further away when the alert went out, but now they were joining the battle. Fresh ships with full weapons and undamaged armor moved into position. The Valkyrie saw these reinforcements and knew their situation was getting worse. On the Valiant's bridge, Captain Kyle watched as another Valkyrie ship broke apart under the railgun fire. He felt no joy in the destruction. These were living beings dying in those ships, but they had come here with threats and demands. They had forced this fight. Kyle and every other human in the fleet would have preferred peace. But if the choice was between peace with surrender and war with honor, humans would choose to fight. Lieutenant Ben Martinez reported that the main guns were ready to fire again. The capacitors had recharged. The targeting computers had locked onto a new target. Kyle gave the order to fire. Once again, the massive guns roared in the silence of space. Once again, kinetic slugs raced toward an enemy ship. The Valkyrie were learning a hard 6 hours had passed since the first shots were fired. The battle had been going on for what felt like forever. The space between Earth and Mars was now filled with floating debris. Pieces of destroyed ships drifted everywhere. Some pieces were large sections of hull with jagged edges. Others were small fragments that had been blown into tiny bits. Both human and alien wreckage mixed together in the darkness. The ships that survived showed the marks of heavy combat. Their hulls were scorched black where energy weapons had hit them. Deep gouges cut through armor where projectiles had struck. Some ships had holes right through them but were still fighting. Emergency lights flickered inside damaged sections. Fires burned in compartments that had lost their air. But on both sides, the surviving ships continued to fight. Commander Zektar stood on what was left of his command deck. The bridge of the flagship looked like a disaster had struck it. Half of his officers were dead. Their bodies had been moved to one side and covered with sheets. The main viewing screen was cracked and flickering. Sparks flew from damaged control panels. The air smelled of smoke and burned electronics. The ship was venting atmosphere from a dozen different breaches in the hull. Teams were trying to seal the leaks, but there were too many. Zektar looked at the tactical display. The numbers told a grim story. He had started this battle with 37 ships. Now only 19 were still able to fight. 18 ships had been completely destroyed or were so damaged they had to withdraw. The human fleet had also taken heavy losses. They had lost 23 ships, but the ships they had left were fighting with an intensity that seemed almost insane. Zektar had seen many battles in his long military career. He had fought against pirates and rebels. He had fought against other empires that challenged Vakri territory. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans did things that no rational military force would do. When one of their ships was too damaged to fight, they sometimes rammed it into Vakri vessels. They used their own crippled ships as shields to protect healthier ones. They fought with a savagery that Zektar had only read about in ancient history texts. Lieutenant Ashley Morgan sat at her station on the cruiser Freedom's Call. The ship was in terrible condition. A Vakri missile had hit the engine section an hour ago. The explosion had knocked out the main power. Now they were running on emergency batteries. These batteries would not last much longer. The hull had cracks in several places. Air was slowly leaking out into space. The crew had put on their emergency suits. Ashley's voice was rough from breathing smoke, but she had not given up. She opened a communication channel to the Valiant. She reported their situation honestly. They had lost main power. The hull was breached and falling apart. They were on emergency reserves that would fail soon. She asked the Valiant to pull back to a safe distance. There was no reason for another ship to be destroyed trying to protect them. Captain Kyle's response came back immediately. The answer was negative. The Valiant would not pull back. Instead, it was moving to cover the Freedom's Call. Kyle told Ashley to hold on. Help was coming. They were not going to leave her and her crew to die. The Valiant moved through the battlefield toward the crippled cruiser. Its armor was scarred and dented, but its weapons were still working. The big battleship placed itself between the Freedom's Call and the nearest Vakri ships. It used its own hull as a shield. When Vakri ships fired at the helpless cruiser, the Valiant took the hits instead. Its railguns fired again and another alien ship died in a bright explosion. This was the moment that broke Commander Zektar's will to fight. It was not the weapons that defeated him. It was not the casualties or the destroyed ships. It was the realization that these humans would die for each other without any hesitation. They did not abandon their wounded. They did not retreat when logic said they should. They fought as if every single ship contained the entire future of their species. In a way, that was exactly how they saw it. Each ship was crewed by men and women from different countries on Earth. They came from different cultures. They spoke different languages at home. They had different beliefs and different traditions. But they were all united by one simple fact. Earth was their home, and they would defend it together. Every human on every ship knew that they were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for their children and grandchildren. They were fighting for the future of humanity among the stars. Zektar studied the tactical display one more time. He looked at each piece of data carefully. His reinforcements were days away. They would not arrive in time to change the outcome of this battle. The human fleet, even though it was battered and damaged, could still destroy his remaining ships. His intelligence officers had been monitoring human communications. More human ships were on their way from the outer colonies. The humans had more forces that had not even joined the battle yet. The Vakri commander thought about what had brought him to this point. He had led his fleet here to conquer what he thought was a primitive species. The intelligence reports had said humans were barely capable of space travel. They were supposed to be weak and easy to intimidate. Instead, he had found something completely different. He had awakened a Deathworld species that the galaxy had not seen in many generations. Humans were technologically advanced enough to be extremely dangerous, but they still had the savage will to survive that came from millions of years of evolution on a hostile world. They combined modern weapons with ancient fighting spirit. They had the organization and discipline of an advanced civilization, but also the ferocity of predators, defending their territory. Zektar realized that continuing this battle would only result in the complete destruction of his fleet. The humans had already proven they would never surrender. They would fight until either they won or every ship was destroyed. The Vakri commander did not want to test which outcome would come first. He made a gesture that was common among his people. It was a gesture that showed acceptance of defeat. Then he gave orders to his surviving ships. All vessels were to cease fire immediately. They were to withdraw to the outer edge of the solar system. The communications officer was to prepare a transmission to the human commanders. The Vakri would negotiate rather than continue fighting. On the Earth Defense Station, Commander Jake Harrison watched his tactical display. The alien ships were stopping their attack. They were turning away and moving back. For a moment, Jake could not believe what he was seeing. Then confirmation came from multiple sources. The Valkyrie were retreating. They were requesting negotiations. Around Jake, his crew began to celebrate. Officers hugged each other. Some people were crying with relief. Others were shouting with joy. They had been fighting for their lives and the lives of everyone on Earth. The stress had been enormous. Now that stress was released all at once, they had survived. They had won, but Jake did not join the celebration. He remained standing at his post. His eyes stayed fixed on the tactical display. Yes, they had won this battle. The Valkyrie were retreating. But this might be only the beginning of a much longer conflict. The Valkyrie Empire was huge. This fleet had been just one small part of their military. They might send more ships later with a larger force. Even more important was what this battle meant for humanity's future. Humans had just announced their presence to the galaxy in the most violent way possible. Every spacefaring species in this part of the galaxy would soon hear about this battle. Some would want to be friends with humanity. Others might see humans as a threat that needed to be eliminated before they became too powerful. Jake thought about the cost of their victory. 23 ships had been destroyed. Thousands of people had died. Thousands more were injured. These were not just numbers on a screen. They were real people with families and dreams. They had given their lives to protect Earth and the colonies. Their sacrifice had saved humanity, but the price had been high. Around the solar system, other humans were having similar thoughts. In the hospitals on Mars, doctors worked desperately to save wounded soldiers. On Earth, families waited anxiously for news about their loved ones in the fleet. In the asteroid belt colonies, people looked at the stars with new understanding. Space was not just a place for exploration and mining anymore. It was also a place where they might have to fight to survive. The Deathworlders had awakened. They had proven they could defend themselves against a superior force. But Jake knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Humanity had taken its first steps into a much larger and more dangerous galaxy. The real challenges were still ahead. But at least now the galaxy knew one important fact. Humans would not go quietly into the darkness. They would fight for their place among the stars with every weapon they had and every ounce of courage they possessed. 3 weeks passed after the battle ended. The debris field between Earth and Mars was still there, but salvage crews were now working to clear it. The damaged human ships had limped back to repair stations. Some could be fixed, others were too badly damaged and would have to be scrapped. The dead had been honored in memorial services across the solar system. Now it was time to deal with the aliens who had started the war. A neutral meeting place had been established in the asteroid belt. Human and Valkyrie engineers had worked quickly to build a small diplomatic station. It was a simple structure with meeting rooms and living quarters. The station floated in space halfway between the human and Valkyrie positions. Both sides had agreed that no weapons would be brought to the negotiations. Ambassador Laura Mitchell led the human delegation. She was a career diplomat who had worked on Earth handling disputes between nations. Now she would represent all of humanity in talks with an alien empire. She walked into the main conference room with confidence. Behind her came military advisors. Commander Jake Harrison was there. Captain Kyle Bennett had also come. They wore their dress uniforms with medals showing their service. Across the polished metal table sat the Valkyrie delegation. Commander Zektar was there. His bearing was still proud even though his fleet had been defeated. He wore formal robes instead of his military uniform. Next to him sat several other Valkyrie officials. Some were diplomats. Others were advisors on law and trade. Translating devices sat on the table so both sides could understand each other. The negotiations took several days. Both sides had to overcome their anger and fear. The Valkyrie had to accept that they had been defeated by a species they thought was primitive. The humans had to work with beings who had threatened to destroy their civilization, but slowly, carefully, an agreement began to take shape. The treaty was historic. The Valkyrie Empire formally recognized human sovereignty over the entire solar system and all human colonies. No Valkyrie ships would enter human space without permission. In exchange, humans agreed to join the Galactic Council. This was a group where many spacefaring species discussed problems and made agreements. Humans would have a voice in galactic affairs, but would also have to follow certain rules. More important than the official treaty were the informal conversations that happened during breaks in the negotiations. People from both species talked to each other. They shared meals that were carefully prepared to be safe for both species to eat. They learned about each other's cultures and histories. One evening, Commander Zektar approached Captain Kyle in a side room. The two military officers had fought against each other just weeks ago. Now they sat down together to talk. Zektar spoke through his translator device. He said he had fought in 17 different military campaigns across 4 sectors of space. He had battled many different enemies, but he had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Zektar explained his confusion. Humans fought with a ferocity that his people associated only with the most dangerous predator species. Yet humans also showed compassion and mercy, even to their enemies. The Valkyrie wounded had been treated by human doctors with the same care given to human casualties. Humans were technologically young, but showed tactical brilliance in battle. What kind of world could produce such beings? Kyle pulled out a small display device. He showed Zektar an image of Earth taken from orbit. The planet looked beautiful with its blue oceans and green continents. White clouds swirled in complex patterns. It looked peaceful and inviting. But Kyle explained that appearances could be deceiving. Kyle told Zektar about Earth's gravity. It was 1.3 times what the Galactic Council considered standard. Most species would find it difficult to even walk on Earth's surface. The stronger gravity meant human bones and muscles had to be much stronger. It also meant human reflexes were faster because they were used to everything falling more quickly. Then Kyle explained Earth's weather. The planet had massive storm systems that could destroy entire cities. Hurricanes with winds over 200 kilometers per hour. Tornadoes that could pick up vehicles and throw them hundreds of meters. Blizzards where the temperature dropped so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. Thunderstorms with lightning that could kill instantly. And these were normal weather events that happened every year. The planet itself was violently active. Earthquakes shook the ground without warning. Volcanoes erupted and buried entire regions in ash. Tsunamis caused by underwater earthquakes could wash away coastal communities. The very ground humans lived on was constantly shifting and moving as massive tectonic plates ground against each other. Kyle continued explaining. Earth was home to countless diseases that had killed millions of humans throughout history. Viruses and bacteria that could spread through populations. Parasites that could infest the body. Fungi that could grow in human tissue. Humans had developed strong immune systems, but the diseases had evolved too. It was a constant battle. And then there were the predators. For millions of years, human ancestors had been hunted by large carnivores. Huge cats with teeth like knives. Bears that could crush bones with their jaws. Wolves that hunted in packs. Crocodiles that lurked in rivers. Sharks in the oceans. Venomous snakes and spiders. Early humans had not been the strongest or fastest animals on Earth. They had survived by being smart and working together. Kyle looked directly at Zektar as he explained. Humans had learned to survive by cooperating with each other. They had learned to never give up, no matter how bad things seemed. They had learned to turn every setback into a lesson, and every challenge into an opportunity to grow stronger. When the Valkyrie threatened Earth, they did not just threaten a piece of land. They threatened everything humans had worked for across millions of years of evolution. They threatened everything humans had sacrificed to build. Zektar listened carefully to all of this. Then he performed a gesture where he dipped his head slowly. Kyle had learned this was how the Valkyrie showed deep respect. The alien commander spoke again through his translator. He said he would make sure his people understood what kind of species humans were. He thought it was fortunate that the Valkyrie had encountered humanity now, when humans were still new to space travel. If they had met a century from now when humanity had grown into its full power, the Valkyrie might have faced complete destruction instead of just a defeat. Zektar predicted that humans would become a major force that would shape the entire galaxy. Other species would have to adapt to the presence of these Deathworlders. The galaxy had been relatively peaceful for many years. That era was ending. A new age was beginning, and humanity would be at the center of it. Back on Earth, people were dealing with the aftermath of the war in their own ways. The victory celebrations had been huge at first. People had danced in the streets. Flags were waved. Strangers hugged each other. But as time passed, the mood became more somber. Everyone was thinking about the cost of their victory. A memorial wall was being built in Geneva. It would eventually have the names of every person who died defending humanity. The wall was made of black stone that had been brought from the moon. Each name was carved carefully by hand. There were over 6,000 names. Some were military personnel who died in combat. Others were civilians who worked on the ships and stations. Commander Jake Harrison stood in front of the memorial one evening. A light rain was falling across the grounds. He wore his dress uniform but no hat. The rain soaked into his hair, but he did not notice. His eyes moved slowly across the names carved into the stone. He recognized many of them. These were people he had trained with, people he had eaten meals with, people he had called friends. Lieutenant Amy Parker found him standing there. She walked up quietly and stood beside him. After a moment of silence, she spoke softly. She said they had won the war. The people whose names were on this wall had died, but humanity had survived because of their sacrifice. Jake nodded slowly. His hand reached out and touched the cold stone. The names were cut deep into the rock so they would last for generations. Yes, they had won, but winning had cost so much. Now the real work had to begin. The galaxy knew about humanity now. The secret fleet was no longer secret. Some alien species would want to be allies with humanity. Others would see humans as a threat that needed to be dealt with before it was too late. Jake spoke quietly but firmly. The galaxy would learn what the Valkyrie had learned. Humanity did not yield to threats. Humans did not break under pressure, and they would never give up their home without fighting with everything they had. The people whose names were on this wall had proven that. They had given their lives to protect Earth and all human colonies. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Above them, the night sky was changing. If someone looked carefully, they could see new points of light that had not been there before. These were human space stations, human ships, and human colonies spreading throughout the solar system and beyond. The Deathworlders had awakened. They had announced their presence to the galaxy with fire and fury. Now they were reaching for the stars with both hands, determined to claim their place among the ancient species of the cosmos. 6 months had passed since the battle with the Valkyrie fleet. Life in the human colonies had changed in many ways. The hidden military bases were no longer secret. Everyone now knew about the defense fleet. New recruits were joining the military in record numbers. Young men and women wanted to serve and protect humanity's future among the stars. The treaty with the Valkyrie Empire had been formally signed. Both sides were honoring it so far. There had been no more threats or confrontations. Diplomatic channels were open. Some trade had even begun between human and Valkyrie merchants. It was a cautious peace, but it was holding. Humanity's membership in the Galactic Council was still being discussed. Many species wanted to welcome humans. They were impressed by the technology and determination humans had shown. But other species were concerned. They worried about bringing such aggressive beings into the Council. The debate continued in council chambers light years away from Earth. On Mars, Captain Kyle Bennett walked through the corridors of the new military academy. The academy had been hastily constructed after the war. Young cadets filled the hallways. They wore crisp new uniforms and carried tablets with their lessons. These students were learning tactics, strategy, engineering, and diplomacy. They were preparing to become the next generation of defenders and explorers. Kyle had been asked to give a lecture to the senior class. He entered a large auditorium where 200 cadets waited. They stood at attention when he walked in. He told them to take their seats. Then he stood at the front of the room and looked at all the young faces staring at him with admiration and curiosity. Kyle began his lecture by talking about the battle. He did not make it sound glorious or exciting. He told them the truth. War was terrible. Ships were destroyed. People died. Friends were lost. The victory had come at a high cost. He showed them pictures of damaged ships and memorial walls. He wanted them to understand what they were training for. But Kyle also explained why the fight had been necessary. When someone threatened to take away everything you had worked for, you had to stand and fight. When your home was in danger, you could not just surrender and hope for mercy. The Valkyrie had learned that humans would defend their homes with everything they had. Now all the species in the galaxy were learning the same lesson. One cadet raised her hand and asked a question. She wanted to know if there would be more wars. Were humans going to fight other species? Kyle thought carefully before answering. He said that nobody wanted more wars. The goal was always peace, but humans had to be ready to defend themselves. Other species were watching Earth now. Some would become friends, others might become enemies. Being prepared was the only way to ensure survival. On Earth, in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Emma Bradford was dealing with new challenges. Intelligence reports came in every day about alien activities. Some species were sending ambassadors to meet with human representatives. Others were reinforcing their own military forces, perhaps worried about human expansion. The galaxy was reacting to humanity's emergence, and Emma had to keep track of it all. A priority message arrived from one of the deep space monitoring stations. A new alien fleet had been detected. This fleet was not Vakri. It belonged to a species called the Torvan Collective. The Torvan ships were heading toward human space, but their intentions were unclear. Were they coming to trade, to talk, or to fight? Emma immediately ordered the defense fleet to go on alert. Commander Jake Harrison received the alert on the Earth Defense Station. His crew quickly moved to their positions. Sensors tracked the approaching Torvan fleet. There were only 5 ships, much smaller than the Vakri force had been. But Jake was not taking any chances. All weapons systems were brought online. Defense platforms around Earth powered up. The fleet moved into defensive positions. A transmission came from the lead Torvan ship. The message was peaceful. The Torvan wanted to establish diplomatic relations with humanity. They had heard about the battle with the Vakri. They were impressed by human courage and military capability. They wanted to discuss trade agreements and possible alliance. The Torvan even included data about their own species and their history as a gesture of goodwill. Jake studied the message carefully. The Torvan seemed sincere, but he had to be cautious. He consulted with Earth Command and with Ambassador Laura Mitchell. They decided to allow the Torvan fleet to approach, but with strict conditions. The alien ships would have to power down their weapons. They could send only one small shuttle to the diplomatic station. Human warships would escort them the entire time. The Torvan agreed to all the conditions. Their fleet stopped at the edge of human space and powered down weapons. A single shuttle launched and was escorted by human fighters to the diplomatic station in the asteroid belt. The meeting went well. The Torvan were traders and explorers, not warriors. They wanted access to human markets and were willing to share some of their own technology in exchange. This was the beginning of a new pattern. Over the following months, more species made contact with humanity. Some came peacefully, like the Torvan. Others came with suspicion and hostility. Each contact required careful handling. Human diplomats worked long hours. Military forces stayed on alert. Scientists studied alien technology and biology. Humanity was learning its place in a complex galaxy. The shipyards around Earth and Mars worked around the clock. New warships were being built. The designs incorporated lessons learned from the battle with the Vakri. The armor was thicker. The weapons were more powerful. The ships were faster and more maneuverable. Humanity was not going to be caught unprepared again, but humans were not just building weapons. They were also expanding their peaceful presence in space. New colonies were being established on moons and asteroids throughout the solar system. Mining operations were extracting resources that were rare on Earth. Scientific research stations were making discoveries about the nature of space and time. Humans were spreading out and claiming their place among the stars. Lieutenant Amy Parker had received a promotion after the battle. She was now a commander running communications for an entire sector. She sat at her desk one evening looking at reports from across human space. There were so many things happening: new contacts with alien species, trade negotiations, scientific discoveries, border patrols. It was overwhelming but also exciting. Amy thought about how much had changed in just 6 months. Before the Vakri arrived, most humans thought they were alone in space. Now they knew the galaxy was full of life, some of it friendly, some hostile, all of it strange and different. Humanity had to learn how to navigate this new reality. They had to find their place among species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. But Amy felt confident about the future. Humans had proven they could defend themselves. They had shown they were not easy prey. They had also shown they could be reasonable and diplomatic when treated with respect. The galaxy was learning that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, both in war and in peace. On the memorial wall in Geneva, fresh flowers were placed every day by visitors. People came from all over Earth to see the names carved in stone. Some visitors were family members of the fallen. Others were just citizens who wanted to pay their respects. The wall had become a symbol of humanity's determination to survive and thrive among the stars. Jake Harrison visited the wall regularly. Each time he came, he thought about the people whose names were there. He remembered their faces, their voices, their dreams. They had given everything so that humanity could have a future. Jake had made a silent promise to them. He would work to make sure their sacrifice meant something. He would help build a future where humans could live safely among the stars. The night sky over Earth showed more human-made lights than ever before. Space stations orbited in careful patterns. Ships traveled between planets carrying cargo and passengers. Satellites and defense platforms maintained watch over human territory. The solar system that had been mostly empty was now bustling with activity. Humanity had awakened to its place in the galaxy. They had fought their first war against an alien power and won. They had established themselves as a species that could not be pushed around or intimidated. But they had also shown they could be peaceful and cooperative when treated fairly. The Deathworlders from Earth were learning to balance strength with wisdom, military power with diplomatic skill. The age of humanity among the stars had truly begun. It would not always be easy. There would be more challenges and probably more conflicts, but humans had shown they had what it took to survive and prosper. They carried with them the lessons from their harsh homeworld. They would never give up. They would always fight for their future, and they would never forget the price that had been paid to secure their place among the ancient civilizations of the cosmos. 1 year had passed since the Valkyrie fleet had appeared at the edge of human space. Earth and its colonies had transformed during that time. The changes were visible everywhere you looked. The orbital shipyards had doubled in size. New defense stations ringed every major planet and moon. The military academy on Mars had graduated its first class of officers. Humanity was no longer the hidden species it had been. The Galactic Council had finally voted to accept humanity as a full member. The vote had not been unanimous. Several species had opposed it, arguing that humans were too aggressive and unpredictable, but the majority had voted in favor. They recognized that it was better to have humans inside the council where they could be influenced rather than outside where they might become a rogue force. Ambassador Laura Mitchell now worked from the council, headquarters on a neutral world called Sanctuary. Prime, the planet was located at the intersection of several major trade routes. Representatives from hundreds of species worked there. The council chambers were enormous structures where delegates debated laws and treaties that affected the entire galaxy. Laura quickly learned that galactic politics were complicated. Ancient rivalries between species went back thousands of years. Economic disputes over resources and trade routes created constant tensions. Some species formed alliances while others remained isolated. Laura had to navigate all of this while representing humanity's interests. It was exhausting but important work. The other council members treated Laura with cautious respect. They had all heard about the battle with the Valkyrie. They knew that humanity, despite being new to space, had military capabilities that rivaled or exceeded many established powers. This gave Laura leverage in negotiations. When she spoke, others listened carefully because they knew humans could back up their words with force if necessary. But Laura was careful not to rely only on military strength. She worked to build genuine friendships with representatives from other species. She learned about their cultures and histories. She found common ground whenever possible. Slowly, humanity was becoming part of the broader galactic community, not just as warriors but as potential partners and allies. Back in the solar system, the military continued its expansion. Captain Kyle Bennett now commanded an entire battle group consisting of 3 battleships, 6 destroyers, and 2 carriers with their fighter wings. His battle group patrolled the outer edges of human space, watching for threats and showing the flag to let everyone know that this territory was defended. Kyle's ships had encountered several incidents during their patrols. Pirates had tried to raid a human mining operation in the asteroid belt. Kyle's battle group had responded quickly, destroying 2 pirate ships and capturing the rest. A territorial dispute with a minor alien power called the Krith had been resolved when Kyle moved his battleships into position. The Krith had immediately backed down and agreed to negotiations. Word was spreading through the galaxy that human space was not a good place for troublemakers. On the Earth Defense Station, Commander Jake Harrison had been promoted to Admiral. He now oversaw all military operations in the solar system. His office had a window that looked out at Earth below. Sometimes Jake would just sit and look at his homeworld, thinking about how much had changed and how much responsibility now rested on his shoulders. Jake received regular intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Human agents and automated listening posts collected information about potential threats. Most of the information was routine, but occasionally something alarming would surface. There were rumors of species developing new weapons, reports of ancient conflicts being renewed, whispers about mysterious forces operating in unexplored regions of space. One report particularly concerned Jake. A distant empire called the Zalgon Dominion was making threatening statements about younger species like humanity. The Zalgon believed they were superior to all other forms of life. They had conquered many worlds in the past and seemed interested in expanding again. The Galactic Council had managed to contain them through treaties and alliances, but those agreements were fragile. Jake called a meeting with his senior staff. They discussed the Zalgon situation for hours. Some officers argued for preemptive action. Others counseled patience and preparation. Jake decided on a middle course. Humanity would strengthen its defenses and gather more intelligence. They would work with allies on the Council to contain the Zalgon threat. But they would not start a war unless the Zalgon moved first. The civilian side of human expansion was also growing rapidly. Commercial ships now traveled to dozens of alien worlds, trading Earth goods for alien products. Human tourists visited strange planets and stations. Alien visitors came to Earth, though they had to undergo careful health screening to protect both them and humans from diseases. Cultural exchange programs allowed humans and aliens to learn about each other. Scientists were making incredible discoveries. Alien mathematics opened up new areas of physics. Medical knowledge from species that had been practicing medicine for millennia helped cure diseases that had plagued humanity. Human scientists contributed their own knowledge, particularly in areas related to surviving in harsh environments. The exchange of information benefited everyone. Lieutenant Commander Amy Parker now worked directly for Admiral Harrison. Her job was coordinating communications between all the far-flung human outposts and ships. It was a massive task that required managing thousands of messages and reports every day. But Amy had proven herself capable during the battle with the Valkyrie, and she continued to excel in her new role. One day, Amy received a strange transmission from a deep space probe. The probe was exploring a region far beyond any human colonies. The transmission showed structures that appeared artificial. They were enormous, larger than any known space station, but they seemed abandoned, floating dead in the void. The probe's scan showed technology that was incredibly advanced, far beyond anything humans or any known species possessed. Amy immediately brought this to Jake's attention. They studied the data together. These structures were clearly built by some ancient civilization that no longer existed. The implications were staggering. How advanced had this species been? What had happened to them? Were there other such mysteries waiting to be discovered in the vast unexplored regions of the galaxy? Jake authorized a mission to investigate the structures. A science vessel escorted by 2 destroyers would be sent. The mission would take months, but it could provide valuable information and technology. Humanity was not just focused on military power. They wanted to learn and explore. The galaxy was full of wonders and mysteries, and humans wanted to understand it all. On Mars, at the military academy, Captain Ryan Clark stood before a new class of cadets. Ryan had survived the battle with the Valkyrie and had become a legend among fighter pilots. Now he taught advanced combat tactics to students who hoped to follow in his footsteps. He took his teaching responsibilities seriously, knowing that these young people might one day have to defend humanity in battle. Ryan told his students about the importance of being prepared, but also the importance of restraint. Military force was a tool to be used carefully, not something to be glorified. The goal was always to protect, never to conquer. Humanity had to be strong, but strength without wisdom led to disaster. The cadets listened intently, absorbing every word from the veteran pilot. Across human space, life continued with a new sense of purpose. People knew they were part of something larger now. Earth was not alone in the universe. Humanity had neighbors, some friendly and some not. The future would bring challenges that earlier generations could never have imagined. But humans felt ready to face whatever came. The Memorial Wall in Geneva had become a place of pilgrimage. Every day, hundreds of people visited to pay their respects to those who had died defending humanity. Some visitors left flowers. Others left small tokens or written messages. The wall had become a symbol not just of sacrifice but of hope. Those who had died had given humanity a future among the stars. Jake Harrison visited the memorial one evening as the sun was setting. He had come alone this time, wanting a moment of quiet reflection. He read the names carved in stone, names he had memorized long ago. He thought about each person, remembering their faces and voices. They had trusted him to lead them, and he had done his best. Some had survived. Too many had not. But Jake also felt a sense of accomplishment as he stood there. Humanity had survived its first great test. They had proven themselves capable of defending their home. They had established themselves among the ancient species of the galaxy. The Deathworlders from Earth had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The sky above the memorial was growing dark. Stars were beginning to appear, more stars than humans could see just a few years ago before light pollution had been reduced. Each star was a sun, possibly with planets, possibly with life. The galaxy was vast, almost beyond comprehension. Humanity had claimed just a tiny corner of it, but it was their corner and they had paid for it in blood. Jake placed his hand on the cold stone of the memorial one more time. He made a silent promise to those whose names were carved there. Humanity would continue to grow and explore. They would face new challenges and overcome them. They would build a civilization among the stars that